Welcome back to Legal Roundup. Today we're going to be talking about self-driving or automated driving cars and how that could affect the personal injury field in terms of, who's at fault, what you could potentially do if you were in an accident with an automated driving or a assisted driving vehicle. Currently, right now, the NHTSA, they classify self-driving or assisted driving vehicles under certain classifications.
Okay.
So some of them have to, of course, they all have to pass almost like a quality test.
Okay. Well,
so
that's
to
good.
speak. Yeah. And you can go to the NHTSA's website to read up on this, but there is a general order for the crash reporting on incidents that involve ADS or Level 2 ADAS. And of course, that stands for Assisted Driving System or Level 2. I'm pretty sure it's autonomous. Essentially, any automated vehicles like Teslas or some of the Chevys out there that do it. I don't think it's the Spark. I think it's called the Volt. I think the Volt does it. The Nissan Ariya does it as well. So essentially, they have to put all that through to the NHTSA.
Okay.
In order to find any kind of safety defects. So they have to make sure that these companies are keeping these vehicles from having any defects at all, which in today's time, I feel like recalls on vehicles happen more often than they probably ever have.
Yeah, I can't speak for how often just because I'm too young, I guess, to know that. But you definitely hear about them all the time, that's for sure.
All the time. I mean, I'm fairly young myself, so but back in the day, I don't ever remember, at least growing up, I never really heard about a lot of recalls. Maybe a few with the Kias back in the day, like the early 2000s. They had a lot of issues with the transmissions being really, really bad, faulty. Mostly on like the early version of the Sportage, I think, is what it was, and the Optima, I guess, is what it was back then, and which we still have the Optima, I think, and the Sportage, but they're so different now compared to what they were then. My mom, prime example, had a brand new one gifted to her by her boss just to get back and forth to work, and within, I think, a month or two of driving it around, and I mean just casual, like to and from work, transmission was out. Replaced it. Another 3 months later, another transmission out.
Jeez.
Yeah, it was nuts. And eventually, her boss was just like, "Look, I can't keep replacing it because there was at a certain point, the manufacturer wouldn't replace it anymore."
Yeah.
Which was crazy. But I don't know how much you've heard about, people being in accidents with an assisted driving car, because.
Yeah, so I haven't read too much about the actual accidents themselves other than maybe some ethical dilemma problems that come up. So yeah, I'm excited to hear about this a little today.
So there has been, over the last, this looks like 3 years, according to the NHTSA, there are plenty of accidents. It's looking about, let's see, just going back to July, all across 2021, there's so many. Let's see, we got 20 there, 33. We'll go ahead and say about 100. There's probably about 100 incidents here, just to be gross on that.
Wow.
On level 2 ADASs, just this year, just in October, there were 14 incidents. There were 14 crashes already.
Wow.
So my thing is, since this is a product thing, from the stance what we were talking about earlier, of course, we've heard about like people up north, like what you were saying earlier, how people will get on Google Maps and it'll lead them off of the road and they'll end up driving across like a frozen lake, or they'll drive off of a like a closed bridge.
Yeah.
Because I know there was one, I think up in probably Ontario. I think it was in Canada. there was this elderly man who was making his way home, and he drove onto a closed bridge,
Oh
and
God.
of course it was also, I think, on the construction workers that they had left it without any kind of signs or anything, and he just drove right onto it, right off of it. Google Maps just let him right over it, which it's supposed to account for that. But in a situation where you're in a assisted driving vehicle and you don't have any control, obviously most people, he was old, so he probably couldn't see.
Yeah.
And when there's snow everywhere, I don't know if you've ever heard of snow blindness or whiteout, which it's essentially when you are in an area where there's a lot of snow. That white from the sun or any light bouncing off of it kind of makes it seem almost like a mirage, almost like you're in the desert. So it's hard to tell like distances and from certain angles. So it could be that he just he didn't see it. But in an instance where you're driving an assisted vehicle, I drove my aunt's Honda Accord the other day. Funny enough, it was Black Friday weekend, and I noticed like every time I would try to correct the car myself, it would pull me to the left or pull me to the right, wherever it wanted to go. So, in an instance where someone's in a wreck in a vehicle like that, where would you? I mean, what would be your first instance the first thing you would look at trying to determine fault in a situation like that?
Yeah, well, that'd be really difficult to determine because, that's obviously one of the things you got to figure out, and it's who to put the blame on. And I guess it's really hard in a situation like that to figure out what could be at fault because there's so many potential parties to this. You've got the driver always, and I think when it comes to the driver, you'd have to ask how much control of the vehicle do they have? If it's a fully autonomous vehicle and you don't even have a steering wheel or pedals in there to control anything, I'd find it hard for the driver. But it's my understanding that if you're in one of these cars as a driver, you're also supposed to be aware at all times. And I believe some of them you can't even have the autopilot part on unless your hands are on the steering wheel and you're paying attention. And then, you've got the car itself when it comes to product liability. Is there any defect with the vehicle that caused this issue?
Sure.
Was it a manufacturing problem with all these vehicles, or was it one-off with this vehicle? And can you show that the manufacturer had a fault in this, and it wasn't the driver himself who messed up something with the car that caused a defect? And then as well, some of these I know you have to update regularly.
It's true.
And could it be on the software company where their update messed with the sensors and now they can't detect stop signs? And that also goes back to, well, at that point, should the driver have taken over and stopped when he realized his vehicle wasn't slowing down for the stop sign? So hopefully in a case like that, these vehicles would have some type of black box or something along those lines that you could really look into the data and figure out who is at fault, or at least have a good idea of it.
That's kind of what I've thought about is like these companies, like I think it's called Waymo. Is one of the bigger ones that has the self-driving stuff, and it still has a steering wheel in it. But it's like it's a driverless taxi service. So in a scenario like that, you're not only looking at potential product liability, but you're looking at I would think, and then if there's an update or whichever. Let's say that it's fully updated and or something like that, and there's like just some kind of malfunction with because it happens all the time. We had a big issue with the CrowdStrike incident, a few months ago, and that was, global.
Yeah.
So in an instance where a bad update is sent out, let's say that somebody's in the back seat of one of those things, and there isn't anyone in the front, and the steering wheel has a cap on it, so you can't jump up front and grab it and try to correct it. So I feel like in an instance like that, it becomes primarily down to, I guess it would be the company Waymo at that point.
Yeah, who's ever in charge of that software, if they're creating a dangerous condition, and that's something I would think is foreseeable for sure. They could definitely be held liable on that. And thinking on this, just the software updates in general, that could also still come back on the driver. let's just use an example that their company's applying a software update to these vehicles because 1 out of every 1,000 stop signs isn't detected. Okay, well, if you hear that and you say, oh, well, that's 0.01% chance it'll happen, I'll update it next week. Well, you go out tomorrow, your car doesn't notice that stop sign. You could also be liable for not keeping your car in a safe condition and applying those updates knowing that there were issues with it.
And thus that kind of brings it back to your level, which means you wouldn't have a claim. And that's so crazy because I feel like there's so many people out here that they don't update their phone right away, which I'm one of those people.
Oh, I hold off. I'm convinced, especially if you've got an older phone, if you update it, the battery starts dying quicker, it starts loading slower, almost like they do it on purpose.
Oh yeah, I feel like eventually and they've been caught doing it, which I still buy their products. So I can't really say anything, but I'm the world's worst about it. And I did it to my computer the other day. It's a 2019 iMac, so I'm like, it's only like 5 years old.
Yep.
Nope, bad idea.
Yeah.
Should have just not did it. Because now it's so slow that I've looked into getting a whole other machine.
Golly.
For what it does, it's fine. But
Yeah.
I feel like that would be me if I had a Tesla or something like that. I'd be like, all right, it's charged, it's fine. I'll update it later.
Especially too, if you think about it, like, I don't know how long these updates take. It could be 30 seconds, it could be an hour, but say somewhere you got to go in a rush, and so you say, oh, I can't update it right now, I'll just do it when I get home, and then it happens then that could still fall back on you because you chose not to get that update knowing there were defects.
That's true. That's true. And that's my biggest argument about the whole deal is, I feel like there should be some consistency regardless if there's an update. And I feel like, it's up to these companies they offer this level of functionality in a vehicle. And it's not like your computer where if your computer's update is messed up, okay, whatever, it might disrupt your day a bit or your work day or something like that. In an instance where it's a vital piece of technology, okay, your car doesn't work, you can get a ride to work. Great. But it doesn't allow you to drive it. I feel like there should be safety measures in place, which I think there are, that shouldn't allow you to drive it. But in the instance that you do your due diligence, you update the car, then it becomes, I feel like, a product liability if the car causes that at that point, right?
Yeah, for sure. Assuming that there's no other intervening factor along with this, like, someone else is hitting your car or something.
Yeah.
That could contribute to anything like that. But I think it would fall on the manufacturer and or the software company at that point.
You see, that's what I was thinking too, is like maybe it would fall on, like Tesla, for example, because supposedly most of the accidents, about half of them are Tesla related.
Yeah.
So
is that because they're just the biggest manufacturer, or they just have the most problems?
I think they had the most product. I think that's probably why they have the majority of it, because there's so many out there now. But in terms of, like, for example, there's countries that are nearly, like, all of their vehicular sales from this year have been electric. I think Norway is almost, I think they said it was like 70-something%
are automated?
Are all electric vehicles,
wow.
which
Electric,
all of
okay.
them, are, outnumbered. It outnumbered the sale of fossil fuel cars this year, which is nasty business. That's 12% out of the entire continent. Norway's Europe, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
It would be Europe.
It's technically Europe, right? Because I know they're. Yeah, that's right. They're up there with freaking
Denmark, Netherlands, all that area.
Yeah, that's right.
Sweden.
That's what I was thinking of. Sweden. But yeah, well, the thing is most of these electric cars, they all have that. They all have some kind of assisted driving. But I mean,
Yeah.
even fuel-driven cars have a lot of automated driving
I mean, I
systems.
I see the appeal in them, but man, just working in this field, I like to have control of my vehicle at all times.
Same.
I'd prefer to put things in my hand and just rely on myself instead of something else in a situation like that.
Have you ever you've never driven one of them?
I've never been inside one.
Oh God, it's so weird. It's the weirdest thing to have the vehicle itself correct itself when you try to correct it, or if you get even close to getting out of the lines. If it can pick up the lines on the road, it will steer itself. I mean, but it tells you to keep your hands on the wheel. But I've seen videos of people on the internet in their Teslas doing the same thing with the automated self-driving, getting in the passenger seat and just chilling.
Yeah, and that could definitely be a problem. If they're telling you that you need to stay there because these aren't 100% automated, and you may have to take over at some point, and you're just sitting in your passenger seat reading a book, you may find yourself with some liability there.
I feel like if it, yeah, I can just only imagine with how much data the NHTSA has. That's a lot of accidents over even just this year. January there were 33. February there were 33. It went up to 51, 61 in April, 70 in May. There were 66 in June, 75 in July, 69 in August, 72 in September, and 14 so far in October. That's a lot of wrecks.
Yeah, for sure is. Jeez.
And I'm sure there's other data on here that it's some of the, I guess these are the reasons why. So there have been reasons for software, and it seems to be that's one of the bigger issues with these automation systems. And that sense, I feel like that definitely comes down to product liability. But I mean, I don't even know how you would. Of course, I wouldn't know, but I wonder how you would. I guess like, would you, from your point of view, would you approach a case like that as your typical product liability, like a, let's say, what's a popular recalled item? Drawing blanks here.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think about any kind of. I mean, your typical product liability would be almost like like some styrofoam cups you bought that contain some kind of chemical and nobody knows about it. You're drinking out of
Not
them.
Not disclosed or anything. Nothing on the warning labels.
Yeah. And you go and drink from one of them. You think everything's fine. You get home and you start having issues. Well, in an instance like that, it's kind of clear. Well, there's no warning labels. It doesn't tell you what it's made out of on the product description. There's nothing like that. Obviously, that's kind of like, all right, well, there's a bit of trial work there, I would feel like. But in an instance like that, where you're fighting, let's say Tesla, for example, what's your typical process of dealing with a product liability?
Well, I mean, so you got to figure out if there's a defect. It's the main part, is there a defect? Was it the proximate cause of injuries? Going through all that. And the hardest part I would say with a defect is, I guess, showing that defect happened from the manufacturer.
Yeah.
I don't know how you'd be able to work it out in that styrofoam example, but I guess say they came home and they thought it was the styrofoam, but they actually just stored it in a jar at their house, or in a drawer next to the rat poison, and that got involved. You gotta show that defect occurred from the manufacturer itself. And I just think these cases are just so different and unique in the sense that, there's multiple people that could be at fault, including the consumer. And there's just not a lot of case law on it. I don't know how much legislation there is on all of this either. And I don't know where you'd look to, if you'd look to see if there's been any cases involving airplanes and the autopilot system on airplanes to try and relate it to those and find an idea through that, or how you would, because, talking about those wrecks, we saw a lot of them were the software based, but to start, it's probably going to be all three of them pointing the finger at each other. That the driver's saying manufacturer, manufacturer's saying software, software's saying manufacturer, and everyone's just pointing in a little triangle.
It's like the Spider-Man
Yeah.
game all over again, where they're
Yeah.
just like,
Exactly.
it's you, but it's also me.
Yeah.
That you see, that's what I was thinking was like, how would you prove it? Because I mean, obviously, if the same manufacturer makes the software, then I feel like that's easy. But then I know a lot of those cars, luckily now, to kind of, I think your fight as far as proving that the individual, or let's say a victim in this standpoint, let's say they're driving, there are no other vehicles on the road, and they have, a lot of those cars have built-in dash cams now, which is really, really cool. And they're not doing anything wrong. They're following the instructions. They have their hands on the wheel, and it's kind of doing its thing, driving. They're just kind of having to hold their hands there in place, and let's just say it starts taking them off the road, where they try to fight it, and it just keeps turning itself, and it runs them off into the ditch. Well, in that instance, I guess you would have the proof there, but in an instance that it doesn't have a dash cam, or there isn't any cameras around, I think Tesla, if I'm not mistaken, I think they have a like a kind of like a black box like system, like we were talking about.
Yeah, I would definitely want to retrieve that black box, but I guess after I got a description of the incident too, I'd probably go online and see if there's any other occurrences of, say, that car drifting left and you're fighting it back and you just can't. To see if this has happened before and it's not just a one-off, because that could definitely help with where to start, whether this has been a common issue known after software updates, or if this is just any vehicle of this model that you buy is capable of doing that to you.
It's nuts, man. I don't know. I think that I would see more problems, maybe not with the assist, because the assist you can like more easily control, and it's usually in fossil fuel vehicles or petrol-based vehicles. And of course, there's many work trucks out here that don't really have any of that. There's lots of commercial vehicles that aren't going to have that. Of course, anything with a manual transmission or manual gearbox is probably excluded, but there are plenty of them out there with assisted driving. And it is pretty cumbersome, but you can kind of maintain the control of the vehicle more than not. But the ones that are just completely autonomous are the ones that bother me, because there's companies like Waymo that have a fleet of these cars, and I've watched videos of them. I don't know if you've seen it, of like the Waymo's cars in California going into this parking lot where they're all parked, and they're all getting themselves confused, because some of them are trying to back into spaces, and then some are just trying to leave to go to their service. But in an instance where you're in a taxi cab like situation, do you blame the product? Do you blame the company that does the taxi service? Or do you blame both in a situation like that?
Yeah, well, I'm for sure starting with the taxi company. That's definitely where I'm going to start. And, they may throw the blame off on the manufacturer or the software when it comes to that. But I would definitely start with the company. See if, so it could be a little bit of both, or all of the above at the same time. Because as we were talking about with an individual earlier, say that company wasn't regularly updating their vehicles. Or regularly performing maintenance or negligently performing maintenance on them. You could have multiple parties involved as well. So yeah, definitely start with the the taxi company itself.
And then if there's like a liability waiver you signed, then I guess you would go for the product itself. I just don't know. It's so weird. Like with rideshare, it kind of makes sense, and there's things in place with things like Uber now, where Uber puts a insurance policy on the driver and their vehicle, and and any clientele they may have, which I feel like in that instance, Waymo there's got to be some kind of insurance
involved with that, or maybe
Yeah, I'd be
even-
curious to know how much that costs that they're paying.
It's got to be millions. It's got to be millions of
Uh-huh.
dollars.
Which I assume if you're hurt in an incident like that, you're probably more than likely, going to be taken care of by that company. I feel like they're not going to want any issues like that.
Yeah.
Because people really, really like the notion of not having to deal with a driver, because there's so many, like in New York, there's a lot of, taxi theft and things like that. Or even just, somebody could steal a taxi and pose as a taxi driver, and they could kidnap someone or hold them hostage or whichever. I've heard of hostage situations taking place like that before. In an instance like this, the car can't take hostage of you unless it locks you in, which would be a really, really convincing script, I think. But funny enough, the majority of them, of the crashes, they happened in California. So
That
I
makes
assume,
sense. I'd assume that's also the highest amount of autonomous vehicles would be in California as well.
It makes sense. They they had the most restrictions on emissions and things like that there, and having a modified car or anything like that is pretty much illegal at this point. Funny enough, there were 7 in Mississippi.
I didn't know we had.
I didn't know either. Well, I mean, there's of course, people here, they'll buy.
Yeah, or just drive through, I guess. I'd feel like I never see them on the roads.
I see, Teslas a lot. I see Cybertrucks every now and again. I don't see a lot of the other ones though. I don't. I've seen a few Rivians. I've seen a few. There's another one. I forget the name of the company. It's starts with an L, I think. They're pretty cool. It's a Lucid. It's a Lucid. Those are pretty cool. I haven't really heard a lot about those. It looks like, to me though, I think this other article I was reading. And it says 53.9% of autonomous vehicle incidents have involved Tesla cars. There were 1,450 self-driving car accidents in 2022.
Cool.
10% of them have resulted in injury, and 2% of them resulted in a fatality.
Jeez.
California being leading the amount here, and then followed by Texas and Arizona, which makes sense to me. We don't probably there's 7 here in Mississippi, so the odds of it happening here are probably
Very
minuscule.
low.
But
I'm kind of shocked by the only 10% of accidents resulted in injury part. It makes me think they were kind of more minor parking lot, fender bender type deals.
It's gotta be.
Either that or injuries just weren't reported because they didn't feel they were significant enough.
I feel like I mean, maybe that was the case, or maybe it's. I mean, I know those vehicles, they have a lot more safety features than maybe your typical car. At least I know a lot of the Teslas do, which is one thing they can stand on, is that their safety standards are pretty high. But I feel like there's a lot of nuance there, and with it there not being a lot of data out there as far as cases are probably concerned, most of it is going to happen in Cali and highly populated areas where taxis and rideshare services are more prominent. It's like this list that I was looking at.
I'm sure we'll see a bunch of further legislation on it too as time goes on.
That's what I was wondering is there, I mean, when you were in school, did they even touch on something like that, really?
No.
Not
We
really?
definitely didn't talk about self-driving cars.
This is
It may
nuts.
have been something that if you're really curious, you'd go talk to your towards professor after class for, but nothing, I guess, common enough or even been around long enough for there to be discussions when I was in school.
That makes sense. Yeah, there's not many.
Because where did you say this data was? Was this 2021?
It's NHT TSA. So they're essentially all of this data goes back to 2021.
Yeah, so this data right here was not even complete when I was going through torts, because I would have gone through torts right around this time that the data was just coming out.
Let's see, monthly. Let's see, this is just over this past year. It's been going on since 21. Yeah, I mean, there's plenty across the board, of course, But yeah, I mean, it's so fresh. I don't
Mhm.
think I wonder how many lawyers have really dealt with it. Um, number of accidents per. So Tesla definitely leads the number of accidents.
Mhm.
Waymo comes in second, and then General Motors. Funny enough, Cruise, Transdev, Honda, Subaru, Zoox. Um, looks like on the bottom of the list is like Too Simple. Obviously, they're Too Simple. Apple. I didn't know Apple had self-driving cars. That's nuts. And they've had accidents,
Mhm.
which makes me worry. It makes me worry about the future of this kind of stuff, which I assume as things go on, they'll get better.
Mhm.
But I feel like that it's just going to open up a whole new industry of cases, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah, it for sure will.
Because I don't know. I mean, from your opinion, do you think it's obviously it's product related, but in a sense of it, what if somebody else's car, you know, say somebody else is in a self-driving car and that hits someone in just your typical everyday driver? Um, I guess at that point, and maybe let's say they were using the self-driving feature and it had a malfunction. At that point, do you take the case against the defendant that was driving the self-driving car, quote unquote, or do you take it as a product liability standpoint at that point? So
Yeah, I mean, each case is just going to be different.
yeah,
Um, it's just from a small description like that, it really could be either way.
yeah,
You'd like to hear your potential client's side of the story, a police report if you can, because I know a police report will have driver's actions. Now, it doesn't have any boxes on there to check for vehicle had a mind of its own and did this, but
that's true.
you'd like to start there, because if they are still in control of these vehicles for the most part, and if they run a stop sign or a red light or something, you'd think it'd be on the driver first. Now you start with the driver, and you may learn later on that he was trying to slam on the brakes, but the car just kept going, thinking it was a red light, and then I guess you'd change your approach from that point.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering too. Was like, how would you even combat that? Because I feel like it could get really, really confusing for someone that they tried to stop the car, or let's say try
Yeah.
to turn it off, and it doesn't turn off.
Yeah.
In an instance, and it causes a collision.
And I'm sure you'd know that, hopefully, you'd know that pretty early on, whether they get out of their car and tell your client, I'm sorry, the car had mind of its own, or tell the police officer who can put in their report something along those lines to help you figure it out.
And that from that point, the lawyer in question could pursue the case in an instance that's the case. Man, this is nuts. I mean, they of course take into effect everything, lighting, where it happened.
Yeah, I was just
road.
wondering how all those sensors, what all they're able to handle. If some of them, may struggle in the weather to detect things like a heavy, thick snow. If it struggles to see things, how well it's able to adapt to road conditions, I guess, to know to start slowing down if you're in rain, not driving 70 on the interstate in a thunderstorm or anything like that.
I think most of them work off of camera.
Okay.
Some of them, of course, it's sensors.
But I mean, if it's heavy raining and you got drops covering all over the camera, is that going to be an issue for detection purposes?
That would be my question. Is how does it even detect it? Well, I know that for the most part it uses cameras, of course. In an instance that, let's say that it can't, detect it because of rain or weather, I feel like there's got to be other sensors on the car to allow it to do that. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it says it right here. It's all it's camera based.
Good. I was hoping they'd think about that prior to making these.
That's what I was wondering. I was like, but I'm pretty sure they base it on trim level. So
Okay.
autopilot is such a funny thing in a car because, like you said, that's my first thing is how does it deal with
Anything,
weather?
really.
Yeah, like how does it even know? Like the lines on the road, okay, but what happens when you get down on like a Mississippi street with it ain't got
Just
no
a
lines?
gravel road in the middle
Yeah.
of nowhere.
Because there's plenty of them in the neighborhoods.
may
around
not even have your maps to direct the vehicle at that point.
Yeah, and that's my thing is like, what if there's an issue with Google Maps, and then do you blame it on Google? Do you blame it on Tesla? Do you blame it on the car itself? It just gets kind of.
You could definitely try and blame it on Google Maps. I think that would probably fall more under the software or on specifically, I guess, the software users, the software company for choosing to run their courses through Google Maps, knowing there could be some imperfections. Because, I mean, we talked about the up north and driving across closed bridges and over frozen lakes, but even when I was in undergrad up in Oxford, that map would take you to places that roads just didn't exist, and it's like you'd be going down a road, you got to get to this neighborhood to your left, and it's just telling you to drive through the trees, thinking there's a road there. And I mean, I could just see an AI car seeing that, and now it just drives you right into a tree, just casually.
That would be my worry. And
Yeah.
I mean, it even says right here, traffic light and stop sign control, beta, which means it's not even
Yep.
done being. But I mean, I feel like if you enable it, there's probably some kind of liability or disclaimer.
I'm
or-
sure that the companies would also say that would be the point where the driver's supposed to be paying attention, and that's when they're supposed to take over in cases like that where they see clearly something's not working right.
I'm just enamored by it. Because earlier I was thinking about it, I was like, I wonder if there's any kind of strange implications that would come down to taking on a case like that.
Well, from what I'd guess, and it doesn't seem there's much case law on it, you'd probably be setting some precedents or at least forcing legislation to speed things up and go ahead and make some rules and regulations behind these vehicles to go ahead and account for something that I'd assume will be likely to be an issue in the future.
But they have to. Apparently, there are consequences if any companies like fail to comply with the crash reporting. So
Okay.
they have to report it to the Department of Justice. So there's got to be some stuff. Yeah, it says right here. Yes, a reporting entity that violates the general order is subject to civil penalties. While this penalty amounts are required to be adjusted annually, as of March 21, 2022, there's a maximum of 25K per violation per day, up to a possible total penalty of 122.1 million for a related series of violations. NHTSA could also refer the issue to the United States Department of Justice for a civil action to compel compliance with the general order. So they have to tell the NHTSA. Wow, that's nuts. And they have to submit it. That is nuts. I'm just enamored by that. It's so new that you can't
It is.
even really find anything on it. Some of the data stuff that's on here, which anyone that wants to check it out, it's nhtsa.gov/laws-regulations/standing-general-order-crash-reporting. That's nuts. Summary incidents. You can download everything. It has the name of the reporting entities, make, model years. There's a few accidents out here. So Waymo is actually owned by Google. Well, owned by Alphabet, which is a subsidiary of Google.
Okay. Then I'll take it they're using Google Maps.
I take that as well. And if you've seen my luck with Google Maps, I wouldn't trust it.
No,
period.
I definitely wouldn't. Definitely a little hesitant with that.
So it looks like there have been some serious injuries, numbering about 58. So in an instance, let's see, no injuries. So about 70% of them, that nobody got injured. Minor injuries was about 15%. Moderate's about 5. Fatalities was 4, and serious is about 3. So I mean, there's just not a lot of data there, and I feel like you could definitely file a claim for something like that. I know that you can for Uber accidents or really any kind of rideshare accidents, which gets into a whole other. I
Yes,
feel
it
like
does.
a whole other thing. So if you had to look at it from a rideshare accident, how does a rideshare accident, as far as a case is concerned, how do you know how you would have to look at that in comparison to your typical car accident, I guess?
Well, regardless, you're a passenger, so I mean, you're not going to be at fault unless you're in an Uber and you do something to the driver that causes them to wreck.
Yeah.
So I guess it really starts the same, but it kind of falls under as well respondent superior or vicarious liability, which is you can go after the entity itself and the driver as a representative for the entity. And there was a big fight about this for a long time, whether Uber drivers and all that were considered independent contractors. So could you even touch Uber for it, or were they independent themselves?
That's what I was wondering.
And I don't think that's actually been decided in Mississippi, but I believe in like the last 5 years, California as basically, I believe they said you could go after Uber and they weren't independent contractors.
Right.
I'd have to reread it, but I believe that's at least what California was able to decide on it.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe the way that it works is you go after Uber, not the driver, because the driver is protected by Uber because of their agreement. It's really weird how it works.
Yeah.
We have an article on our website, I should know, that details a bit about rideshare accidents. So if you are ever in a rideshare accident of any kind, whether it's Uber or Lyft or your common taxi service around town, especially in Mississippi or Alabama, please give us a call at 601-202-1111. Or you can visit our website at pepperodom.com. We have a wonderful selection of articles on here under our resources tab and tips and tricks. And types of cases. I believe it's under types of cases. So what you were saying, it's kind of reversed.
Okay,
so,
reverse. Gotcha.
It's a complicated issue. As ride-sharing companies like Uber consider their drivers to be the independent contractor rather than an employee. This means that the driver cannot hold the company liable for accidents that occur while the driver's on the job, which is interesting. It's also important to know that a driver may hold, in some cases, a driver may hold Uber responsible for accidents that occur while a driver is on the clock. For example, if a driver was at fault for the accident and was acting within the scope of their employment at the time, they could hold Uber responsible for any damages or injuries that result. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess it's a good thing that California ruled that as an
I
independent.
believe that's how they ruled. I haven't read the case in a couple of years, so I may have just stated it backwards. But
it gets complicated.
It does.
It gets really, really complicated when you start getting into a contractual kind of situation.
especially if you go the full blown analysis on it, because there's certain factors like how much do they control in their job versus their boss controlling it. And I mean, it's my understanding that Uber, I mean, you've got your own hours, you can choose to pick up rides, whether or not. So, I mean, I could see an argument for them being an independent contractor, but also at the same time, them being an employee of Uber itself. So it wouldn't shock me if states have just decided differently on the issue.
I wonder. My question is. So you get hurt in an accident working for Uber. Since you're an independent contractor, you can't really file it under workers' comp because you're independent, right? Okay. Well, that clears that up. Well, if you're a driver for Uber and you get into an accident, give us a call, but not for workers' compensation, which is something else we can talk about one day. That's just so crazy. Anybody that decides to drive with autopilot should know that some of it is in beta. I feel like you can also smart summon your car, and you can auto park it too.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, you can auto park it. You can call it, and it'll come in and pick you up. I just don't like. What if you call it and it goes and does its own thing and it runs into somebody else? Are you
I was
at fault?
just thinking that. I wouldn't see how they could put that on you in any way. Yeah, I think that one would have to be on. That's a great question because that could happen with. I guess that'd be on the software not recognizing things.
What if it hurts somebody? I mean, are you at fault for trying to just auto park your car and use a feature? I guess you could hide behind the guise of the company or the software issue.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like that's a. I mean, it's not a you problem. You pressing the button got the car to move, but you yourself did not cause that accident. You were not the cause. So that one would probably fall under the software for the sensor not picking something up or something along those lines.
Oh God, I don't like it. Okay, so it looks like auto steer and some of the features you have to be attentive. It says
That's where I think a lot of this gets really complicated. That even if, say, that software company says, well, yeah, our maps took you on a closed bridge, but there were signs and stuff up, so why didn't you hit the brake? You're supposed to be paying and be attentive to all of this kind of stuff.
Well, it's supposed to be autopilot. So
yeah, so I think that's where people are really struggling to decide with this. Is, well, you're kind of driving, but you're really not. The vehicle's driving, but you're also responsible to make sure it's doing it correctly. So it's very interesting, that's for sure.
See, that's what I don't understand is they're using the terms full self-driving. Autopilot and full self-driving, supervised, are intended for use with a fully attentive driver who has their hands on the wheel and is prepared to take over at any moment while these features are designed.
So I think that's kind of why I wanted, I guess, to really figure this out. I guess you could look at it almost like commercial airplanes. Those pilots are using mostly autopilot, but they also have to be attentive in case something does happen and something goes wrong. You got to be there to fix that.
That's right. And you can't, if in an instance you're in like a Waymo taxi service, self-driving taxi, it's really odd, I feel like, because if that's where you get into the weirdness, I feel like more often than not, even in something like that, which it might seem obvious that, oh, well, you go after Waymo. But if they know that the vehicle has to have somebody there to touch the steering wheel.
Well, so for ones like that, like Waymo, where you just order like a ride share, automated ride share, in those cases, are you responsible for being hands on the wheel and being responsible for all that? Because then it almost sounds like you're more renting a car than getting a ride share.
No, they get in the back.
Yeah, so I don't see how you could be thought to step in and intervene in a case like that when you're a backseat passenger, or if those vehicles even have ways to intervene, because that sounds like a rough idea where someone could get in a driverless vehicle and just take it. I mean, I know there'd be trackers and all that, but if there was a way for them to just hop in that driver's seat and operate it themselves and take it for a joyride, I could see that being an issue.
You see, that's why I wonder, because I know there's certain vehicles out here, or companies. Yeah, so here, this is funny. This article was written on the 11th of November. Zoox, I believe is how you pronounce it, is a autonomous car brand that are going to be hitting the streets of San Francisco with no steering wheel, driver's seat, or pedals. It's backed by Amazon, been operating since 2017. Human driver has been in the vehicle ready to intervene if necessary, but they've now passed...
How are you going to intervene without pedals or a steering wheel?
You're
just going to yell out the window?
Yeah, just help!
Hey, watch out, I'm coming through.
Apparently they have passed all the critical safety measures, and now the autonomous vehicles are ready and free to operate themselves. They qualify as a level 4 on the autonomy scale and will share the road with Waymo. Level 4 self-driving cars.
Maybe there's an emergency brake you can hit. I mean, I feel like there'd have to be some type of manual override
There's gotta
just in
be.
case something goes wrong.
That's what I'm wondering is there a remote guy, like the guy in the chair, somewhere, or is it going to be done with like AI? I just don't get, I don't get how we can have this without there's got to be issues. But I mean, it just got greenlit, so it's going to be happening. But like you said, now in this instance, there's no steering wheel or anything where you can, even if you were brave enough to get up there and intervene with it.
I mean, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, I mean, what are you going to do? Just, I mean, I guess at that point, and see this thing, it looks like there's not even any handles on the side of it. You see that?
Yeah.
It's just like a pill. Yeah, there's no handles. And you look on the inside, there's no handles.
I'm not the biggest car expert, but that thing doesn't look like it gets up and going at any dangerous speeds or anything like that.
It doesn't look like
Almost reminds me of like an automated like horse carriage you'd take for like $10 down in New Orleans to take you a mile somewhere or something like that.
Yeah, or taking the ferry or something where it's just, one way there, same way back.
Yeah.
Can't go wrong. Yeah, I feel like it's probably one of those things, but it's not on a track or anything.
Yeah.
It's just driving around. I mean, I guess it would have to be, the sensors on the side have got to be absolutely just massively impressive for them to be able to do that, which if it's Amazon backed, I surely believe that it's got to be pretty serious. The sensors have got to be some pretty serious stuff. I imagine these cars alone are a few $1 million.
Yeah, definitely not cheap.
No, definitely not. I'm like I said again, I'm enamored by the capability of that, and I'm amazed at what they have to do to get it. I guess passed or something. Other than I guess submitting things to the TSA, but there's a scale to these things. Okay, so there are moistures. It has LiDAR, which is incredible. Driver camera. It's got optical cameras for 3D environments, which is kind of part of the LiDAR scanner. An antenna array for accurate positioning, ultrasonic sensors, so you can get vehicle detection. And there is a road moisture sensor.
Okay.
And a radar using electromagnetic waves. That is crazy. That's on the Mercedes self-driving. Okay. So level 1 is like driver assist. And then partial driving automation, which is like in the Sorrento or the Aria, I believe. 3 is conditional automation. What is conditional automation? See, there's different levels to it. So I'm willing to bet that high-end automation like Waymo or full-on automation is going to be nuts. And I guess those Zoox cars are going to be that. It's interesting, man. See, this is what I worry for, is the completely autonomous, no way to control it, no steering wheels.
Yeah.
No gas pedals, no brakes. And then I guess in that instance, the company responsible would be no matter what. As you said, passengers are never at fault typically.
It's very hard. I mean, outside of putting your hand over the driver's eyes so they can't see, it's pretty difficult for a passenger to bear any fault.
Okay. Well, I mean, I feel like this is, it's definitely something that you should, I feel like if you're injured in an accident dealing with this, you should still seek a lawyer, right?
For sure.
Absolutely.
Without a doubt.
I think that this is going to be something up and coming in the next few years where, you see more and more of it.
Yeah.
Somewhere like here in Mississippi, there's not really any services, I don't think, that offer self-driving cars or anything like that, but there's plenty of people around that have self-driving or autonomous assist. So I think it's important that people know like what their rights are in terms of, you know, what happens if what they can do to protect themselves against things like that. Even if they, you know, use the service, I feel like anything else, you have the right to safety when using a product. You know, I think most of them, they give you a warning label that tells you have to be attentive, which kind of brings me back down to, you know, in the instance that there is some kind of technological malfunction with the software, it could fall back on the company that, you know, manufactured the vehicle.
Same with the warning label. You know, if they don't provide those warning labels of you got to stay attentive, and they're not warning you about that, and then you're not paying attention, but there's something that you needed to intervene with and you didn't, that could also fall under products liability. So that's most likely why that warning label's there.
That product liability is such a funny thing already in itself, and adding this to the mix, I feel like is just a crazy instance that we can't escape in the future.
Yeah.
Which there's not much data. There is plenty of data. Apparently, there is some data that kind of shows what the vehicle is doing before, so like pre-crash movements. Says that a number of the incident, most of them was because it was trying to proceed straight. That's the majority. It's 528 of the incidents that it was just trying to keep driving straight. So right there in turns tells you that, you know, even if you tried to stop it, just keep going. Looks like some of them are because it stopped, just stopped out of nowhere. Some made a left turn, some made a right turn, some it was changing lanes, which strikes me as odd because of the sensors, right, and the cameras. Backing up was next. Parked. Okay, I think that one's kind of, that's weird.
So are these just accidents involving these vehicles or caused by issues with software and stuff like that?
It was issue. I think it's all issues dealing with the automated driving system in the vehicle.
Gotcha.
So this is like pre-crash movements that were made before the accident happened. Up there is right on top is proceeding straight. The other one's like a parking maneuver or merging, entering traffic. Unknown apparently is up there. So there's even some gray area. There's more gray area than there is matter of fact, which is terrifying. Lane or road departure, so just drive off the fucking road. Oh man, what were the crash partners doing when these accidents occurred?
That's what I was wondering.
Crash partner pre-crash movement. Proceeding straight was top. Backing, second. Changing lanes, making turns. Following, parked, stopping. It's odd. Crossing into the opposite lane. So wrong way driving.
Oh, and that was on the driver?
Yeah.
Okay.
Crash partner.
What's a crash partner mean? Is that who you get involved in the accident with, or is that the driver of the vehicle?
Refers to the other vehicle involved in
Okay,
the
gotcha.
crash. Okay, so that means that somebody.
Yeah, else in the car just wasn't able to detect it in time, I guess.
Are self-driving cars smarter than human drivers? Obviously not.
Oh, I don't know. I've seen some pretty bad drivers out there.
I have
now.
seen some pretty bad. I think that's why the whole notion of self-driving
Yeah.
cars came around.
As long as self-driving cars can figure out a roundabout, I'd say they're better than the average driver.
I just have such a hate for automated vehicles. I guess because I've driven one. And I felt how just this odd it feels, and I've felt the sudden stops that they will make sometimes. Like, if it registers that there's a line or a stop, and it thinks there's a stop, it'll just bring you to a halt. And I feel like, with things like that, wearing a seatbelt, but if it just jolts you forward and causes you whiplash,
Yeah, that's a problem.
yeah, you know. I don't think it might be a lawsuit. I mean, maybe some people, some states might say otherwise. But
I think it may depend on how egregious it is. If it does that to you at a green light, then you may have an issue. But if you're about to run a red light and it stops you, he was probably doing the right thing, so I'm not sure.
So it looks like there are some people that take those kind of cases, for sure. Sensor and software due to software limitations, human intervention, unexpected objects or events. That makes sense. So the software bugs or glitches, misinterpretation of road markings or signs. So that would be my fear, is that it would see a sign and not understand what it is and misread the road or misread how to take a certain road, and it just drives you off of a ramp.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's like a merge or a split on the interstate where you have to divide, and it just keeps going straight into the beams or into the divider. Well, I definitely think that of course you should be able to get anything for your medical expenses, lost wages, anything like that. So it would follow suit similarly to a regular car accident.
Yeah.
Next to it being laced with product liability, I think that there is from my standpoint, it seems like there would be an initial approach. If there's no one else involved, I guess your first thing, would be to, obviously, once you got a police report and figured out, okay, this is what happened, you'd probably aim to serve, I assume, the car manufacturer in that instance. But in the case that it's not, and let's say there's like a limb or something in the road that it can't detect, what do you do in that instance? Do you still go after the manufacturer?
Yeah, I mean that feels like a mishap on their part to not think that something like that could happen. That a limb could be in the road. That's something that's foreseeable. At least anywhere where there's trees, it's foreseeable. It may not be an issue if you're out in the desert.
No, yeah.
But that definitely feels like a foreseeable issue, and that'd come down to the sensors. Now, whether that's because of the software or the manufacturers itself is a different question. But I could definitely see them liable for something like that. And I've wondered the ethical parts behind this too, where say there is a limb, but it's, I don't know, not a limb. Say an individual's walking down the road. It's almost like a trolley problem issue. But do they protect, I guess, a pedestrian versus the person in the vehicle? Or what happens in a case like that where someone's walking across the road? Is your autonomous car just going to go through them? Say they're walking, you got a green light too. So they're walking when they shouldn't be. Is that car just going to plow through them because you got the green light? Or is it going to swerve off and drive the driver into a wall? I've always wondered about the ethical parts behind the autonomous vehicles, since I guess you almost have to have a hard line set rule for the vehicle to follow in that situation, whether it's protect the driver at most or just however it weighs that.
That's interesting. I feel like there's like a double lawsuit there. One from the pedestrian and one for the person driving
There
the
could
car.
be an
There's
argument to be
accident.
made for either that the car did an intentional act that caused an injury because it intentionally drove them into the wall, versus obviously you don't want either case to happen, but how that decision is made by the manufacturers or software engineers of the car for that car to make that decision.
I feel like that gets into a whole other thing. Because if you hit a person, but it's not your intention, and the car has a malfunction or just doesn't detect them, like you said, what if it's like late at night and it doesn't, maybe they're wearing black or dark clothing and it doesn't detect them because it needs a certain amount of light to pick up their skin or pick up their clothing or whatever. Because I'm not sure if there has to be some kind of security protocol in that equipment that will detect things in the road.
You would
so
sure
that it
hope.
will stop. You would hope.
Yeah.
But in the case that it doesn't, and it misinterprets what it is, and it just keeps going,
Yeah.
and you can't save it in time, I feel like it gets so hairy. How would you approach that from a personal injury standpoint? Would you if the person in the car called and wanted you to represent them, what would you do? Would you say, look, I'm gonna be honest with you, you don't have a claim here, or would you, so to speak, say that, well, we can go after the product manufacturer?
Yeah, I mean that once again, to me, it feels like it's a product or software issue, but then it's going to come right back around of the manufacturers are going to be saying, this is why we have that label that says you are supposed to be attentive and paying attention at all times, because our vehicle, as safe as they want it to be, it may not be the perfect vehicle. And there's a reason that they're telling you to pay attention and to be on top of things while you're in that car, whether you're the one necessarily doing the actions of the vehicle or not. And it'd be a lot of finger pointing, that's for sure.
Everybody's blaming everybody else in that instance. That's it's sticky stuff, man. It's sticky. And there's a lot of it that has happened in the U.S. alone. I just wonder how much it's going to increase over the years as it goes along. Because I mean, there's obviously some strict policies on reporting it, but the safety procedures and policies on it are what I wonder. Because I mean, we still have recalls on vehicles every day, whether it's an engine part or a safety issue, and 9 times out of 10 it's a safety issue nowadays, whether it's a faulty airbag or faulty sensors. It's really funny, and I think that there's obviously less risk when there's a human involved. But as time goes on and we have these nothing but automated vehicles, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the future. Because let's say there's an instance where there's a pedestrian and they're hit by an autonomous vehicle. Well, they have all the right in the world to go after whoever. Obviously, the passenger isn't at fault. They can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
There's some steering wheel. They can't stop it.
Yeah.
So I feel like at that point, it always comes down to product liability. So I guess we're going to go ahead and cut it short here today. I know we kind of spread it pretty wide as we can, and I think it all comes down to product liability for the most part. In an instance that you're hit or injured by an autonomous vehicle, or you're in an accident that's caused by a self-driving vehicle and it's no fault of your own, please give us a call at 601-202-1111. And in the instance that you're maybe injured by another product that doesn't have a clear warning label, if you're injured by a product that doesn't specifically state, hey, you need to do this first, doesn't warn you, therefore or beforehand that you could be injured using the product if it's not used properly, also give us a call at 601-202-1111, and one of the attorneys here at Pepper and Odom will be glad to assist you with any of your injury-related needs. Until next time, thank you for watching Legal Roundup.
Thank you.